Hello, my name is Andrew Steele, and today I'm going to be talking about my native interview assignment. This one was my favorite one so far because it gave me an opportunity to kind of get out of the office and branch out to talk to some other people that I met thus far. So the first person I interviewed three people. One person, Ross, was someone who I work with. He's an older gentleman, been living in Australia his whole life. Uh, very, very, very funny guy. I really enjoyed some of his answers. The second person was Catherine. She actually works at the apartment complex I'm staying at. I see her every day when I come back. And it was nice, every day kind of stop by, said hello to her. But now I've because I see her all the time, but it was nice to sit down with her, and talk with her. And the third person I interviewed was John, who lives next door to me in my apartment. And he was really really interesting because he has an interesting story in the sense where he hasn't lived in Australia his whole life. He's only been here the last 10 years. He came coming over from the UK, so he had an interesting perspective, which I think was very in line with Australians, but not completely. I think the UK, US, and Aussies have a lot of comparable cultural competencies. But there are definitely were some differences in his answers. So we're not going to go too deep into any particular answers, but I just thought I'd give you background on who I interviewed. Um, so now we have our questions here. So I chose a wide range of questions. My kind of like charter for how I structure the question was I first hit on like some Australian points. One day in Australia, what do you do? Describe your favorite place in Australia. How do you think Australia is going to grow in the next couple of years in terms of economic power? And then I kind of got on the softer stuff that's more personal. How comfortable taking risks to find a successful person. And the reason I did that was because I think this gave me a good sense of, okay, tell me about the Australian culture and then tell me about your like individual beliefs. And I think it was good to make the connection there. And I definitely saw a connection among the three interviewees. So I just had a couple of favorite questions just because there are some really good answers to what I had in these. So the one really good answer that I had was to describe your favorite place in Australia. And this was really cool because it was John answering this one, and coming from another country, this makes sense why I answered it. But he said his favorite place was a place called World Square, which is essentially a block in the middle of Sydney that is diverse as all get out. It has a lot of elements of Chinatown in it. It has a lot of elements of the Australian culture in it. And they really do blend together really nice. And he said, coming from a different country, it was nice, to kind of have a place like this because not only does it show you the diversity of the Aussies, but it also gives you a good way to go and connect with other cultures. And I go to World Square a lot just because it's very close to my building, and I've noticed very similar things, and that's one reason why I like going there. Um, Next was the describe Australian culture in 3 words, and this was Ross who was kind of pulling my leg for this one because he answered this one saying Australian culture in 3 words. I'll answer it from an American's perspective: kangaroos, surfing, and beaches, which I thought was pretty funny, just because that's what a lot of us think of. When we think of Australia, there's a stereotypical thing. Um, and this goes to the point that I'm going to speak to in my Johari window, because of Australians completely recognize and understand the stereotypes they have towards to their country. I'm not going to get into it too much now because I want to explain it later. But I think a lot of times Americans don't really recognize how others view us. I think it's especially in the last year with certain political events, but um, I think Americans recognize the fact that a lot of countries can make them out to be stupid, and Americans are kind of a joke. But I think that there are other facets that we don't particularly understand as far as other people's viewpoints. But I think the Australians, just my time being there, being here, and plus these interviews, they have a really good idea of how they're perceived by other countries. Which, like I said, I'm going to get into later. And then the last question, which I found really interesting, was what cultures are most similar to yours? And I actually got three different answers when asking this. I got California slash USA, Canada, and the UK. Which I find which I find interesting because those four countries in themselves are all very comparable countries. I would think that there are going to be very similar sets of beliefs, and and culture points within those four countries that are named. But I found it interesting that it was Ross who I asked. Ross said that California was a was the most common. He said that California within the states is most comparable to Australia, because I personally don't think that. I think that the stereotypical viewpoint on California might make it seem like it's a lot like Australians, because they're laid back, they're very outdoorsy, surfing, beaches, kind of stuff like that. So I can see why somebody who's not from the states would say that. But yeah, I thought that very interesting that he specifically said that state. Um, and then just going back to some other questions that were asked. This was one was really interesting to me. Where is it? Uh, as far as college goes, in Australia, and college here is very common. So the difference here is that people don't board at school. They actually live at home, so they have a very different college experience. I remember on one of my first days, and I just learned that. On one of my first days here, a guy who was showing us around, Tim, was telling us how you know, you don't go out looking for crazy college kids. You go out looking for kind of kids your age, because the term crazy college kids is really very only similar to the U.S. in the sense where there's a big drinking scene, a big party scene, which is not the same here because you're living at home. So that was one thing I found really interesting. Which now kind of makes sense after doing these interviews, because the whole it's just a totally different scene here when you don't actually board at a school. Um, so going on to the takeaways, Australians, like Americans, are very well versed on their origins. We got just a little background story of you know Australian was a prisoners colony. They landed in Bondi, but then they came to Sydney. We got a very brief overview of it, but like the United States, they know exactly where they came from. You can kind of think of learning it like the American Revolution. It was just something that is very well stressed and taught in school, and they have a like and they and they know there's countries' origins, which I guess like you should. I think it's very important to know kind of the where your country came from. But I find this interesting because I didn't know this, that they're in the Commonwealth of I think we actually had a holiday for the Queen's birthday, which was I think 4 weeks ago, and I found that really interesting because I although people, although that's not exactly viewed as like a religious holiday, I find it interesting that they still, that they still view it as an important day that you can take off work. Um, so, kind of going off of that, we'll just kind of going off of that, I think that they're much more nationalistic than people think. I didn't, America, we have people like, Go America, we're the best damn country in the world. And Australia is very similar. Australia, they do have this alpha complex where, they think that they are the best country, which to me, I completely did not see it coming, which I was very surprised by that. And they just have a lot of pride in being Australian. There was a Australian, I think it was Australian Scotland rugby game, and just like a basketball game or a national soccer game in the United States, everyone went to the bars and everyone rooted for their team. True, literally chanting Australia, Australia, just like you would hear USA, USA if you were in the States. They're very proud of their country, and it almost to a sense where they're going to start kind of looking down, and have that the alpha complex that I was telling you about. But at the same time, they're intrigued by U.S. culture. One cool thing during my interviews was that my interviewees often change the question on me and ask me. So they would ask me, how would you describe America in 3 words? Because they're really interested in the United States culture. Um, my first week here working, I got a lot of questions like, so what do you think about Trump? What are your view on guns? Because they take these very broad stereotypical things and they ask you about it because they're interested. It's just they definitely have like a good cultural inquiry sense where they want to learn about other cultures, the U.S. in particular. Um, and I would think also going off of that, I talk about this diversity a lot, but it definitely leads to a plethora of viewpoints. So one of the questions I asked was, where do you see the Australian, do you see Australian becoming like an economic global superpower? And we have John from England who said, no, not really. I don't think they can do it. But then you have Ross, who works in financial services and, was saying, oh, 100%, Australians going to be, one of the top three in the next, in the next 10 years. And I think that kind of goes back to that nationalistic thing as well. Ross being an Australian, of course, think that, but John is not. You can identify with the culture, but not with being like a native Australian is not going to necessarily think that uh, about Australia because he connects more to England. So I found that there definitely is a plethora of viewpoints. Um, and then, like I was saying before, the world, they recognize the world's beyond them. And I'm really going to get into that next. But, they know what we think about them. They're very open about sharing their opinions of what they think about us or other countries in the world. So, just kind of going off that, we'll get back to that 1 second. But first, we're going to look at the Johari window. And so first we have known to others and known to ourselves, which got kind of cut off there at the top. Um, and first, being laid back. Australians recognize they're laid back. It's kind of something that we think about them too. Same thing with outdoorsy. They're very outdoorsy people that love being outdoor because it's usually beautiful here, except in the winter, which they call cold, but it's 60 degrees and people are cold today, which goes over my head. But that's a topic for another day. They're fun loving. Australians recognize the fact that they love recreational. They're exciting, personal people, and also we view that about Australians too. That's definitely something that we, when you think about Australians, we think, there's just awesome people, do a lot of cool stuff, love being outdoors. So I think so that section right there is probably the easiest to get. It got a little difficult as we went down. Not known by others. And that would be like diverse. Like I was saying, um, Australians view themselves as a very diverse country, and I know personally coming in, I didn't see it that way. I didn't see that. I didn't see that. Really see the. I thought it was just a very Caucasian dominant society. So that really surprised me. And they also view themselves as like very, very cultured because, and, going off that because they have so many different countries, coming to Australia. We have England, there's a lot of Irish people here, a lot of people from different parts of Asia. So, they view themselves as like a very cultured people. And also intelligent. When people don't a lot of people don't think, all right, Australia, strong market, smart people, but Australians think they're smart. This kind of goes back to the alpha complex. So Australians, and they are smart. Australians think that they have a very good grasp on markets. They have a very good grasp, on business in general, and and that kind of goes back to what Catherine was telling me about. That's why a lot of Australians go to the United States because they think that that they're smart, well put together people, and they can make it in the United States. Kind of like the American dream kind of thing.